So if you've been subscribed to the channel, I mentioned that I was going to be making another video, more specifically a follow-up to my other video that I made, I think it was either on the weekend or this week. I think it was on the weekend. Um, and that changed because I kind of gravitated to a different mindset and different direction for this video. That video probably will still be made, but I need leverage. I need to be in that same headspace to make that one. That one's like more of that's a video that comes from the heart as well as just really it's just a really like loaded opinionated video that I just don't have the means to make at this moment. So instead, I'm gonna make a more subdued video, kind of taking some themes from other videos that I've watched and kind of more breaking this video down to a more like personal but informative video that's not like as, I guess, preachy as the last one. I want to talk about the main topic specifically is centered around the idea of what we want nowadays. And more specifically, talking about my story and talking about my experience throughout the years that I'm kind of in a confusing state and why it's actually important regarding videos that I want to make in the future because it's kind of hard to make those videos without like establishing my where I stand in position for these things, as well as are these opinions realistically how I feel, or am I just borrowing from other people and stuff like that. So I'm gonna start off and talk about my history with gaming and what I used to think gaming meant to me. When I was younger, like in elementary school, gaming for me was well, I pretty much grew up with gaming because my dad was a gamer, or he still is. But yeah, when I was 4 years old, he was playing like SWAT 4, Flat Out 2, the first Rainbow Six Vegas game, and I was always gravitated to those games. It really didn't matter what video game it was, if it was a new video game, if it was just something that I haven't seen before, I was always fixated and interested in it. And that kind of shaped a lot of my personality and decisions that I made in the future, or well, I made nowadays. So coming from that, when it came to like elementary school specifically, if I had to think of something that was easily an escapism, it was video games. It was not because I know a lot of people tend to use this thing as like you want to just escape from reality, but like with all this, with everything that I've been through, I normally it was just it was like it was a whole new world. Didn't matter what I was playing. For the most part, I'd play like stuff like Infamous. Um, I my mind's kind of drawing a blank because a lot of the good games and my favorite games that I ended up playing was more towards like when I was like 11. But before that, it was like I'm pretty sure we had the Wii, PlayStation 2, and PlayStation 3. But I remember mostly games from the Wii and the PlayStation 2, stuff like obviously like Wii Sports, Mario Kart, and then for the PlayStation 2, stuff like Flat Out 2, Smuggler's Run, um, the Hot Wheels Velocity game, and I also played like some GameCube games such as NHL Hits 2003 and SpongeBob Balfour Bikini Bottom, as well as SpongeBob the movie game. And from there, that basically, yeah, that was like my outside of school. That was my main form of escapism. And then when I wasn't gaming, I was just playing outside with my friends, and we were just basically we were making our own versions of games that we were obsessed with, whether it be stuff that we have played or stuff we haven't played. And at when it was primarily, I would say the grade seven was the main turning point, or at least the grade seven going into grade eight was the main turning point for me because it was kind of like there was always like drama between my dad and my mom because my dad would show me obviously mature games and let me play the mature games even though I didn't really understand them, and my mom wasn't really against that, or my mom was mostly against that. But it was really funny though, because like I would end up playing like Saints Row 4, but yet my mom would still be like getting mad at my dad for letting me play GT Online, which they're both equally not good games for 11-year-old to be playing. And from then on, I that's when I really got into my favorite video games, such as like Saints Row 2, Just Cause 2. Just Cause 2 was actually early on. Just Cause 2 was the first open world game that I played by myself, and my dad didn't get me into, actually, now that I think about it. I love that game to death. I love that game to this day. It's one of my personal favorite open world sandbox games, next to obviously Saints Row 2. And then I was also into more racing. I was into a lot of racing games, Split Second, Blur. Well, Blur came later on. MotorStorm, definitely MotorStorm, as well as can't forget Burnout Paradise. High school, it was a weird point for me because I used to my main philosophy was that because of elementary getting bullied in elementary school and getting in trouble all the time, I the new way that I started thinking and going into high school was like I need to be good and I need to do well in school. And those were like that was the new set that was the new set strategy that I went into high school with. And honestly, I I think it paid off really well. It's funny because like I would have all my work done, I would study, and in that time at high school, I spent a lot of time gaming, specifically online gaming, and more specifically probably GT Online. GT Online consumed a large portion of of my youth, as well as or just teen years in general. Um, that as well as the whatever other stuff that I got into at the time, like the I guess yeah, Far Cry 5, really Far Cry 5, Call of Duty, and GT Online were like the main games that I played a lot. And then outside of getting some other games and playing with friends, but I did spend a lot of time playing with my friends from through grade 9, grade 10, grade 11. Pretty much, it really wasn't until grade 12 that things started slowing down. Um, and honestly, I would say it was grade 12 specifically, if not getting to the end of graduating, considering that this was during the pandemic, that I started thinking about my how do I feel about gaming, and am I playing and am I losing touch with gaming? Because more and more times I would just take like almost 2 whole weeks off of not playing anything. And instead I would just watch movies and I'd watch TV shows, as well as a lot of YouTube, that I started thinking like it's not the game's fault. Even though a lot of the time I would get bored on my PS4 and I'd hook up my PS3 again, and then I'd waste so many weeks just playing games on the PS3, whether it be Saints Row 2, more specifically Saints Row 2, um, if not Blur or MotorStorm, specifically MotorStorm Apocalypse, especially Just Cause 2. Those were a lot of that's where I did a lot of thinking after, like, in terms of switching between consoles and trying to finalize my perception of like, am I getting tired of video games in general? Because when you hit a point where even your favorite video games that you don't normally spend a lot of time with, but you go back to for those reasons, when that gets tiring, you start to think about do you enjoy this thing still? Is this a hobby that you really enjoyed? For a large amount of time, like from, I would say, since I was 6 all the way to maybe 17, 18, or maybe about it's probably 17 till yeah, ever since I was 6 all the way to 17, I started I always thought that video games was my main hobby. I always thought that video games was something that um was a huge part of, like, it was like my number one form of entertainment. It was my favorite thing to waste time on. But then eventually you feel like I don't know if I felt like I was like growing up, if I just felt like I was wasting more time, even though that there were other things that I was wasting my time on. It was specifically video games that I just started cutting back on. And uh, it was very easy to fall victim and fall under, or and get or and start reading into the idea that wokeness is causing these problems. The new modern gaming is the issue. And from a glance, and if you're in the same mindset as I was, it's pretty easy to believe that stuff. And specifically, I don't. The my main issue, one of the main issues that I have, is that some people, really, I think the best person to that has a point that I agree on the most is probably Young Yi, because Young Yi, when he talks about companies like Sony or Microsoft being bad people, like that's the way I always, or something that I've always thought about specifically when it came to something that I didn't like about at the time. I mean, I don't want to call it modern gaming now, but like from the PS4 era of games, it was not caused by it wasn't anything to do with wokeness. It was I would say it was the idea that the companies started cutting back on fun and instead trying to basically make blockbuster experiences. Ever since the ever since the PS3 era, specifically when GTA 5 came out, I something I always thought about, like my dad would say this in conversations with people. It's like, yeah, video games were like it started off like pixel, but now like they're basically blockbuster experiences. And I always thought about that and consider that as a talking point now, because a lot of people, and I think some people that have this wokeness argument still kind of make these remarks that I do still agree with, is that a lot of the time the companies are focused more on like set pieces and making a game look outstanding, but then they're forgetting about the fundamentals and the actual important things you need to have a good video game, whether it be gameplay, story, characters. Those are the main things that if it doesn't matter nice your how good the game looks at the end of the day. And I think it was probably during No Man's Sky. When No Man's Sky came out, that's when I started believing that more. Games look so good, but they lack a lot of stuff that other games had before this, or just games that did things better because they had these things. They focused on these elements instead of just making a game look good. Um, it, Probably about I think 2015. Even though 2015 was a good year for gaming, I don't think, after 2015 really is when games started looking better, but started performing worse, or just started having less. And I actually used to think that that was a talking point for the wokeness, but then I realized that no, instead it's a focusing on issues that aren't actually important, because I don't know why people would rather argue about representation in a video game over a game being playable, be it a game that doesn't have crashes, a game that story makes sense, a game that has tons of microtransactions that's predatory towards children, or even just overly expensive games that you get half the game and then the rest of the game gets patched later, like through months on. Like that's when I started thinking that there's a lot of issues with gaming. But then I started thinking about whenever you get out of specific mindsets, specifically the negative ones, like for example, not think like the woke stuff. You don't think about the woke stuff anymore, but you still. I'm a PlayStation 5 owner, and when I look through the store, I just don't see anything that interests me. And I know nostalgia is one hell of a thing that a lot of people tend to think, well, it's not like games suck nowadays and games are better back then and so. But like there are certain elements to games back then that I genuinely miss, and I started thinking in a more like even center playing field, if what I think would be better for market, and it's honestly, I can tie this back to a different video about a different subject. Um, but I feel like in the 2000s, there was a very specific push there was a specific push towards a specific branding, which was like a lot of people call it like the edgy era of gaming. And because of that, then the 2010 era is when things got more brighter. And I start to think that maybe we can have both because there are more there I feel like there are, at this point there's two different audiences, and I'm not and I feel like even counting the anti woke crowd doesn't really, like, there are points that a lot of people agree with, but to put them in one specific category and say that if they could make games specifically for those people, I feel like even that just isn't right. It's more or less just someone that wants some fun, like the same fun material they grew up with in the 2000s, and then the people that still want bright, colorful stuff, um, very good looking graphics, filled games that can range from all sorts of genres too. I think that it would be better for gaming because right now the indie scene is pretty much just that. You have games made up of nostalgia as well as games that push the envelope and are doing something new, but because they're not AAA, they will fall victim to not being they won't be seen a whole lot unless their advertising is pushed more heavily, or it just gets covered by more people to talk about. That's why every time when I mentions like Steam, for example, it's like, oh, like, I don't really like my PS5, but if I know that I still like gaming, and if I get Steam, I'll have that. I'll be put back into the. I know that I'd probably feel like I felt in the last couple of years where, or not, I wouldn't feel drained by the market. I'd feel like that there are games there that would keep me invested for some time. I don't know if I would remain invested, but at the same time, the grander issue that I've come to think of is, and more specifically just from listening to other people's experiences, is that specifically with modern hardware, modern games now, a lot of the or some of the push to make you think that, oh, games suck now, you don't want to, or there's nothing to play nowadays, you just want to keep going back and playing the old stuff. There's kind of two different reasons for that specifically. One would be just to go back to something that's familiar. The other thing would be because consuming too much social media is one of the main reasons why you feel like there's not a lot to enjoy now, that, or at least new stuff that to enjoy now. And the one thing that I realized that by not watching a lot of YouTube and then started watching like Reacher, for example, normally I've been putting off watching any sort of movie, any sort of show, but not having that time on social media and then watching Reacher and binging it until like the new episode comes out, I realized that, yeah, I genuinely believe that nowadays, I don't know if it was specifically the same back in 2021, but I would say nowadays the overall, I guess, like, depression that lasts a bit, not wanting to do much, low motivation, not wanting to play anything, not wanting to watch anything, and just wanting to listen to music all the time is caused by overly consuming so much social media. And it also goes the same where even if you're trying to go on YouTube and you see there's a bunch of new stuff that you want to watch, there's nothing that you want to watch because you've consumed so much social media that's like, it has to be very specific. For me, there's only like a couple of exceptions that I'll make. Metal Trenches is one, Coffee and Cult is another, Crust Bag, and probably, oh, album, album reactions to stuff like Smags or Molly Sanborn. Oh, and Critical Reactions. Those are like the main exceptions. Everything else, don't really care unless I'm in a specific mood, or maybe I just need time away from social media for a bit. It sucks when you want to make a specific YouTube video centered around a thing, but then you have to watch or a little bit of YouTube to understand what you're talking about when you make that video, because that's already bad enough. And then whenever the video's done, you just want to just not do that. You don't want to get out of there, or you don't want to stay in there, and because it's just so draining. But I ask myself now, is gaming the issue? Is social media the issue? Why don't I enjoy gaming anymore? Why don't I enjoy social media anymore? I do think that one is responsible for the other. The other is, and then the main thing is like when I consider my job, when I consider doing stuff productive, productive is the big one. So if I do something that isn't productive, that's normally a sign for I can't spend a lot of time on that thing, on whatever that thing is, unless it's centered around content or centered around something that I'm interested in that moment in that at that time too. But now I feel like specifically music has taken over that all that stuff, all that escapism that I used video games for, and I do think that there was a change at some point. Definitely high school was the big change. And I know a lot of, and some people say like, they want to, some people want to play gaming because they want to relate with the character, or most people want to consume media that they relate to. Personally, video games for me was never really about that. And whenever it is, it's very personal and it's actually emotionally draining, which I will cover in my next video. My my main thoughts are if you personally feel like there's nothing to play nowadays. Oh yeah, the other argument too is if you play a lot of multiplayer games, that's another thing too. Play competitive multiplayer games in general is like this is the same level of is it's the exact same as consuming so much social media. You get accustomed to something so specific, or in this case, something that you the ups and downs of both, whether it be the social media you consume or the games that you or the online multiplayer games that you play, where you don't know if you want a game that's like either going to kick your ass or a game that you just want to like relax to. That's kind of with social media. You don't you might want to your brain is going to tell you to click on some rage bait or you're going to watch something that's like more just I don't know, something that fulfills your interest in some way. But regarding that, the main thing that I would say is definitely limit your consumption of social media, as well as if you play only multiplayer games religiously, definitely cut back on that. Definitely try some new games or try games that even if they're games that you wanted to try and you never thought about or you thought twice about getting into, try those games. For me, I like a lot of bad games like Mafia 3, Just Cause 4. Um, but then again, those games specifically are tied to franchises that I love. Are tied they even though they're considered bad games, they still have those elements of those games that I love that I always go back to. I'll always replay them. Um, and but yeah, there's for that. And the other thing too is if you play too much, you'll also probably get burnt out. It really applies to everything. If you consistently do something all the time, no breaks, or just too much, eventually you're going to get tired of it, and you don't want to get depressed and you don't want to suffer burnout. For me, if I had to force myself to make that other video that I was planning on making instead of making this video, I would probably take like 3 weeks off after that because I didn't want to do it, and this is something that I felt like I needed to make. So yep, another overly convoluted ramble about something that I feel like is probably one of the biggest conversations right now, and a lot of people tend to push it in political ways that just doesn't make sense. As well as if you genuinely believe that what you have always loved is has stopped bringing you joy, that's when there is a time to take a break from something. That is when there's time to stop watching people that are telling you that there's a specific reason why this is it, and instead take a step back. If there's anything else that you enjoy, do that instead, because guarantee you will be more happy in that regards. The most common example that I could use right now, and even when it comes to music, is that when I mean that music has become my new escapism, it has basically become a shadow for me. Anytime that I'm not near someone, or specifically outside of work, I am listening to music. And whenever I run out of what specifically I want to listen to, I literally have a wheel that I spin. It will tell me what playlist that I should listen to or what artists slash band's discography I should check out. And I thought about one time I did try doing that with games, but my I feel like that was just a phase because now I'm back to selectively picking what I play. But regarding that, even I even bring it to work with me because I find that it makes things easy. It makes things easier to get through the day. But I've also been considering recently, is that also a contribution to feeling more drained? Because work doesn't normally make me feel drained, but just the idea of or I don't know if that would add more to, I don't know what exactly that would add because I enjoy playing music. I enjoy making AI songs with the kids, but at the same time, I do think that there's times to take a break, and if the kids are old enough to know that, then I think everybody else should realize that you shouldn't push yourself too hard, and even if you're trying to satisfy other people, if it's at the cost of your mental health, you might as well just stop. Take a breather, go back to it when you're ready. And in the meantime, do something productive. Productivity for me is the number one thing that keeps me going. If I am not doing something productive, I will become depressed. I will literally just stay in one place, not move, definitely have music on, but um, something that one of the things that kind of gets me out of that is definitely going outside, especially when it's cold. But outside of that, staying productive, I would say, is probably your best option. I'm losing my voice now, so that's the end of the video.